On the morning of January the 2nd, 1492, a king rode out of the most beautiful palace in the world. He was not riding to war. He was not riding to celebrate. He was riding away. Behind him, the gates of the Alhambra clicked shut for the last time. In his hand were a set of keys, the keys to his city, his palace, his kingdom. He had just handed all of it to the people who had spent 10 years trying to take it from him. He stopped on a mountain pass just outside the city, turned his horse around, looked back one final time at the towers rising against the winter sky, and he wept. His mother was riding beside him. She looked at her son, a king, sobbing on his horse, and she said something so brutal that people still repeat it 5 centuries later. She said, "Weep like a woman for what you could not defend as a man." That mountain pass still has a name, the Pass of the Moors' Sigh. That was the last breath of a 781-year war. But the ending is not the strangest part. The strangest part is why it lasted that long. And it had nothing to do with which side had the stronger army. This is not just a story about Christians and Muslims. It is a story about what happens when two sides are so busy destroying themselves that they forget they are supposed to be winning. The year is 711. Spain belongs to a Christian kingdom called the Visigoths. On paper, powerful. Land, armies, gold, a king named Rodrigo. But powerful-looking kingdoms are sometimes the most hollow. Half the nobles hated Rodrigo. The other half was watching. There was one nobleman in particular, Count Julian, loyal until he wasn't. Something happened between him and King Rodrigo. Historians still argue about the details. What they agree on is what Julian did next. He crossed the water to North Africa. He sat down with a Muslim general named Tariq ibn Ziyad and handed him everything: weak points, uncommitted nobles, road maps, weapons, horses, boats. He handed a stranger a map to his own country and said, "Here, take it." Before a single Muslim soldier set foot in Spain, a Christian had already decided his own kingdom deserved to fall. The most dangerous enemy the Visigoths ever faced did not march in from outside. It walked out of their own court. Tariq crossed the strait in 711 with roughly 7,000 men, all of them staring at a steep, rocky cliff that would carry his name forever. Jabal Tariq, the Mountain of Tariq. Today, the world calls it Gibraltar. The moment his army landed, Tariq ordered every ship burned, every single one. His men turned and saw fire where the escape route used to be. He looked at them and said, "The sea is behind you. The enemy is in front of you. You have nothing left but what is in your chest and in your hand. No retreat, forward or nothing." 7 years later, Muslims controlled almost the entire peninsula. A kingdom that had stood for 3 centuries crumbled in 7 years. Not because the Muslim army was unstoppable. Because the Visigoths were already cracked from within. Nobles switched sides mid-battle. The king died in the chaos, and his body was never found. A kingdom does not fall that fast unless it was already hollow long before the enemy arrived. The Muslims renamed the land Al-Andalus, and what they built there became something that had no equal in Western Europe at the time. While the rest of Europe survived in wooden villages with barely any books, Cordoba became a city of 500,000 people. Paved streets, street lighting, hospitals, public libraries. The library of Caliph al-Hakam II held over 400,000 books. Most European monasteries at the time owned fewer than 100. Scholars crossed entire countries to study there. The word algebra is Arabic. 4,000 Spanish words trace back to Arabic. Al-Andalus did not just conquer Spain, it rebuilt it. But the same flaw that destroyed the Visigoths in 7 years was quietly growing inside Al-Andalus too. Al-Andalus held it together for 3 centuries, which made what came next far more painful. In 1009, civil war broke out inside the Caliphate of Cordoba. Within 20 years, it had shattered into more than 20 separate mini-kingdoms. Historians call them the Taifa kingdoms. 20 men who used to share one powerful fist, each now swinging their own and mostly hitting each other. One of those Taifa kings, Al-Mutamid of Seville, actually paid Alfonso VI of Castile gold every year just to keep his Christian army from attacking. He was paying his enemy a salary to stay calm. And he was not the only one doing it. What happened next is the part of this war that nobody talks about in the simple version of history. Go back to 722, 11 years after the conquest. In the steep, wet mountains of northern Spain, a Visigoth noble named Pelayo refused to accept it was over. No palace, no army, no resources, just mountains and refusal. He gathered farmers with rusted swords, broken soldiers, and monks who had decided that God and sharp rocks could coexist. He led them into a narrow mountain gorge called Covadonga, where the cliffs pressed so close that the light barely reached the ground. The Muslim force sent to remove him walked in expecting nothing. They found Pelayo's men already above them. Rocks first, then arrows. The gorge became a trap. The Muslim force fled. Small fight, barely a skirmish, but it changed what seemed possible. Pelayo was crowned king. The cave became a kingdom. The legend spread. That one ambush became the starting fire of a pushback that would not end for 7 more centuries. Meanwhile, the Taifa kings kept bleeding. When they could not hold the Christian advance, some hired Christian mercenary armies to fight their Muslim neighbors. The people defending Al-Andalus were funding the army dismantling it. New Muslim forces came from North Africa to stop the collapse. The Almoravids crossed in 1086 and halted the Christian advance at the Battle of Sagrajas. A second wave, the Almohads, pushed north and handed the Christians a crushing defeat in 1195. For a moment, the south seemed like it might hold forever. Then came 1212. For the first time in generations, the Christian kingdoms cooperated. Castile, Aragon, and Navarre marched together to Las Navas de Tolosa and broke the Almohad army in a single afternoon of unified force. That one day of cooperation did what centuries of individual effort could not. After that, the south fell fast. Cordoba in 1236, Valencia in 1238, Seville in 1248. By 1300, one Muslim kingdom remained, Granada. Granada survived on cleverness, tribute payments to Castile, political marriages, playing Christian kingdoms against each other. For 200 more years, it outlasted every prediction through sheer diplomatic endurance. But by the 1480s, Ferdinand of Aragon and Isabella of Castile had merged into a unified Spain that could not be paid off or navigated around. One voice, one goal. For 10 years, the walls closed in. Supply routes cut, fortresses taken, food running short, allies going quiet. Boabdil, the last Nasrid king, watched every exit seal from inside a palace getting colder each winter. On October the 28th, 1491, he signed the surrender in secret and told almost no one. For 60 days, he walked the halls of the Alhambra, knowing exactly what was coming. On January the 2nd, 1492, he rode out with the keys. Ferdinand and Isabella waited below. He handed them over and said, "God loves you greatly. Sir, these are the keys of this paradise." Then he rode to the mountain pass, looked back, and wept. His mother said what she said. 781 years ended not with a cannon shot, but with a king on a horse, handing over his keys on a quiet January morning. Here is the answer to the title. The war lasted 781 years because the Visigoths were cracked before the first Muslim ship arrived, because the Caliphate of Cordoba destroyed itself at the height of its own power, because Taifa kings paid Christian armies gold to survive one more season, because Christian kings spent generations fighting each other instead of pushing south. Every time one side was close enough to end it, division pulled them back. Division was not a side effect of this war. Division was the war itself. You see this same pattern everywhere around you today. Any group with real power that keeps losing Look past the enemy they keep pointing at. The crack almost always started inside, long before anyone on the outside found it. 781 years. Two sides, one shared flaw. Which side do you think destroyed itself more? The ones who built something extraordinary and burned it from the inside? Or the ones who took 7 centuries to cooperate long enough to finish what they started? Drop it in the comments.